the March 3rd, 2015 meeting of the Board of Education to order. And we have a very special guest with us, Kerrigan Hewitt, a 5th grade student at Hancock Elementary School, and she is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. Kerrigan?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So, Kerrigan, welcome. I think you probably have some special guests that are with you today. Would you like to introduce them?
I have my parents, Jan Hewitt and Shannon Hewitt, with me today.
Welcome, Mom and Dad. Appreciate it. Is there anything in particular you'd like to share with us today? What you like best about school, what you could do if you were principal for a day? Just share with us.
I like social studies. Social studies is my favorite subject. I think if I was principal for a day, I think I would have a deer time, drop everything and read, and I would maybe take away a couple subjects for the day, and it would be a fun day.
Which subjects might you take away?
Probably math and science.
And science,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, not very important subjects for at least one day, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a brother, and he is 7, and his name is Coleman.
And you noted that our board rep, who isn't with us today, unfortunately, his name is Coleman as well.
Yes.
Great. Anything else you'd like to share with us? What do you do outside of school?
I like to play outside and play with my American Girl dolls, and I like music a lot, and I play piano and bass clarinet, so I like to do that.
Excellent. Would any of my colleagues have questions?
Dr. Harding's is keeping his, he's not real fond of the math answer, but I love the social studies answer, by the way, because that was my field, so.
Thank you. Yes.
I'd just like to say that I think it's great that you like drop everything and read, and that will serve you into adulthood, because I can testify that I love to drop everything and read, and I do it every day.
Very good. Thank you. Any last words you'd like to share with us? Oops, sorry. Yes.
I'd just like to say that I'm very happy that you like American Girl dolls, because I collect dolls.
Thank you. I think it's an honor to be here today and to represent my school, and I was happy to be given this opportunity.
Thank you, and it's an honor for us to serve all the students of Washington County. So thank you, and thanks to Mom and Dad again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other special guests my colleagues would like to recognize? All right, we're on to the approval of the agenda.
Madam President, I'd like to move for the approval of the agenda with one change, and that is to move the first item under the superintendent's report, labeled Recognition of Student Athletes for State Championship Success, to be the first item after board member response to public comments. So I move for adoption of the agenda with that one change.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gesford. Any questions or comments on the motion? Okay, the question is on Dr. Harding's motion. All those in favor? Looks like we have a 6-0. Thank you. And before we go forward, Mrs. Fisher will not be with us today. Obviously, her chair is empty. She's a little under the weather today, so I should have recognized her earlier, and I apologize to my colleagues. Approval of minutes.
Yes, I move for the approval of the minutes for the work session of Tuesday, February 17th, 2015. the budget work session of Tuesday, February 17th, 2015, the closed session for Tuesday, February 17th, 2015, and for that of the business meeting, also Tuesday, February 17th, 2015.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Questions, comments? The question is on Mrs. Williams' motion to approve the minutes as listed. All those in favor? Thank you. 6-0 on the minutes. That takes us to public comment. We have one citizen here today, Ryan Miner. If you would come forward, please. Mr. Miner, you've spoken with us before, so you know the timing.
Yes,
Welcome.
thank you. So good afternoon, Dr. Wilcox, President Brightman, Vice President Hardings, and members of the board. My name is Ryan Miner. I'm going to use my MacBook Pro today to read my remarks, and hopefully I can contribute to reducing the paper output. It's unlikely that if I had written this, I'd be able to read my cursive handwriting. So that's not indicative of my teachers, but instead probably a case of an impatient hand, and sometimes my brain works a little faster than my hands and fingers. I am a former and proud student of Washington County Public Schools. I began my education journey in Rachel Rice's Lincolnshire Elementary School classroom in August of 1989. I'll turn 30 this November, but by the color of my hair and maybe lack thereof, some days I feel slightly older. Unlike many of my fellow students at the time, my parents sent me to something called computer camp. And this was during the summer of 1991. I was 6 years old at the time, and computer camp, I would ask my mom incredulously, "Are you kidding me?" I wanted to play outside and hang out with my friends, but my mom and dad, they made me go. We learned how to type, and we learned how to use the original Apple computers. I don't remember every moment of computer camp, but I do remember forging the river, trying to feed my oxen, and deciding whether I would be a banker, the farmer, or the carpenter while playing the Oregon Trail. My mom and dad bought me a very first home computer in about 1993. I think it was a Gateway. I couldn't believe it. My mom said to me, "Ryan, don't break this, and absolutely no food near this thing." So I learned how to paint and draw and using Microsoft Paint and many of the other applications. I learned how to type, I learned how to play games, and I began my exploration into the world of technology. A few years later, we kept the monstrosity of the Gateway, but we upgraded to a compact laptop. I'm sure we remember those. Then this thing called the internet suddenly emerged. Say what? My mom and dad, being part of the AOL generation, signed up for an account. We waited 20 minutes each time to sign online, and there it was, the internet. Now we were emailing, researching, and exploring the world with a single click. So during elementary school, the best days, aside from gym class and band class, of course, was heading to the computer lab. I remember using Encyclopedia Encarta to research about the moon and the stars. And I remember bringing my now deceased grandfather to show him my laptop and to show him what I discovered while researching National Geographic. My grandfather, a 1950 graduate of the old Hagerstown High School, he graduated, went on to serve a lifetime in the United States Air Force. He finally retired in 1998 as a Chief Master Sergeant with the 167th Airlift Wing of West Virginia Air National Guard. But in his career, he learned some of the most complex technologies. And as a former Air Force technician and maintenance guy, some days he may have groveled about the always new and expanding technology, but he too, at his late age, embraced it. The supplemental technology tools would have never worked inside of a classroom or a computer lab if the teacher would have not embraced the technology and learned with us how to open our student imaginations to the world. I needed some extra help as a student, and I was blessed that my mom and dad provided me with outside tutoring during elementary and middle school. My tutor used a computer to teach me phonics, the original way. We used a computer to learn how to do algebra, and I used a computer how to write properly, grammatically correct, and within proper format. So let's fast forward to my junior year of Williamsport High School. At the time, I didn't think so, but it turns out that my most favorite teacher in the world, even still to this day, is Marie Stake, or as she reminded me, the students, about her last name, not the kind that you eat, but the kind you drive through someone's heart. She taught us eager high school juniors how to research and use technology to write our very first term paper. Begrudgingly, we endured our first term paper. I cannot imagine where I would be in life without my teacher, Mrs. Stagg. I'm blessed to have used technology all throughout my undergraduate experience and now in my graduate studies in business school. As I grew in my academic studies, technology kept growing faster and opened up the world of possibilities for me. My spouse has 2 children from a previous marriage, and now that I've stepped into a parental role, Paige, our feisty and creative little 8-year-old, and Josh, our studious and methodical future president of the United States, sometimes, given our living situation, we can't always be together. But we found a way, using technology, to communicate, to check homework, and say good morning, good night. We use this device, my iPhone, my MacBook, and we speak through Skype about our days. We discuss homework, and we talk about what we learned in math class, much to the chagrin of my 8-year-old. There is nothing more important to me to be able to tell those 2 great kids good morning and good night and how much I love and admire them, all through the convenience of technology. My life has changed because of my teachers who were willing to embrace technology and change the future. My kids have changed because we, as parents, have embraced our hearts and have used technology and all that it has to offer to teach them how to embrace learning in a new way. Without teachers, our digital learning plan would never be possible, and without many of you who are teachers, your lives, our lives as students, would never be the same. Each of you have the opportunity to change more lives by supporting our digital technology learning plan. Our school system has allocated the resources to implement this program. Your budgetary concerns are legitimate, but this plan is not competing with employee positions, and it's certainly not competing with the operational budget. I know many of you are on the fence about this initiative, but I want you to think about how many lives you can change and improve by implementing this vision and putting this plan into fruition. Technology is every part of my life, and without Washington County Public School teachers, I have no idea where I would be. And without their willingness to embrace technology, I can't even imagine my education experience with the Washington County Public Schools would have been as world-class as it was. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Dr. Wilcox, President Brightman, and Dr. Hardings, the future is in your hands. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Minor. We now have an opportunity for board members' response. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to the amended agenda, which is, oh, sorry. I'm remiss. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to come forward and share some comments? Seeing none, we now move to the amended agenda, the recognition of the student athletes for state championship success. Dr. Wilcox and board members.
Thank you very much, board members. If you would join us up front. Mr. Wright, if you'd come forward and read the names, we're going to recognize some state champions. It's another bright day in the county, so please come forward.
I usually go this way.
We have the privilege of recognizing the Smithsburg High School boys track team for their state championship this year. Before I bring them forward, I'll just make a couple of quick notes. The Smithsburg boys were also the Region 1A West champions this year. This is the second year in a row they have earned that title, and also the second year in a row for the state championship. So tremendous success for the team. Overall, they finished third in the MVAL Antietam Conference and placed second in the county championships. And I'll call them forward now. Will Ewing, 55-meter hurdles, 4x400 relay. Kyle Ebersol, 55-meter hurdles. Micah Danyo. Micah's 4x800 relay, 500-meter run, and 800-meter run. Matt Crook, 4x800-meter relay. Matt Wilson, 4x800-meter relay. Zach Garvey, 4x800-meter relay and 800-meter run. Will Merritt, 1,600-meter, 3,200-meter, and 800-meter. Justin Levesque. Justin is a 500-meter runner and 4x400-meter relay. Jonah Smith, 4x400-meter relay. Adam Dwyer, pole vault, Derek Gordon, shot put. Before I bring up the final member of the team who's with us today, his name is Heath Hott. He is also a shot putter with the state championship team. Heath was also an individual shot put state champion. He finished third in the MVAL Antietam Conference and third in the Washington County Championship meet. Heath Hott, shot put. Also representing Smithsburg, Gabby Reason. Gabby won the 55-meter dash and the 300-meter run state championships. I'm sorry, it's a 55-meter, correct? 55-meter dash state champion. This is Gabby's second year in a row as the 55-meter state champion. She also placed second in the MVAL Antietam Conference in 55-meter dash and was the Washington County champion in the same event. Gabby Reason. Finally, assistant coach Ray Shriver. And head coach TJ Hood. As those of you who have watched us do this before, we'd like to recognize the performance in the classroom as well as, in this case, on the track and field. The Smithsburg boys team has a combined GPA of 3.6, and we congratulate you for that success as well. A round of applause, please. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Any further comments, Dr. Wilcox?
No.
We'll come back to the rest of your report.
Yes, please.
Perfect. Now there's no unfinished business, and we're moving on. Excuse me. There's one unfinished business, the consideration of the second reading of proposed changes to policy DKA. Mr. Trotta and Mr. South.
Good afternoon. The first reading of the proposed changes to policy DKA was presented at the Board of Education's public business meeting conducted on February 17th. The proposed changes were made available to the public for comment. We did not receive any comments. At this time, the policy committee is requesting the approval of the second reading of the proposed changes to this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for a motion to approve the second read.
Madam President, I move for the approval of the second reading of proposed changes to policy KDA, payroll procedures.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ridenhour, thank you. Discussion, questions for Mr. South, Mr. Trotta. Seeing no questions, the before us, Dr. Harding's motion is on the floor for approval. All those in favor? 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now on to new business and consideration of the consent agenda. Mrs. Freeman?
Good afternoon, President Brightman, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. We have 3 items on your agenda this afternoon. The first is a purchase of 80 iPads on 4 requisitions to Apple Inc. The total of that order is $29,920. Second on the agenda is an RFP renewal. RFP 2013-33. This is our on-call for architectural and engineering services contract The board approved the contract in March of 2013. This is the first renewal for the third and fourth years under the contract. The prices that I've provided in the price schedule represent the prices that would be fixed and firm for quotations under the contract for a one-year period. Even though it's a two-year renewal, pricing is reviewed annually. Make sure you're aware of that. The contract does not obligate the school system to any specific purchases, and we only pay for services that we receive. The contract includes firms with specialization in disciplines architecture, civil engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and structural engineering. When we have a specific requirement, we solicit quotes from all the companies that were awarded that discipline. So we do get competition at that level on a per-project basis as well. The contracts are not exclusive, as designs for larger projects can be formally advertised and solicited to outside companies. These prices are subject to review annually, not to exceed 3%. The Director of Maintenance and Operations and Facilities Planning and Development are both very satisfied with the quotation prices and the quality of the services that they've received under this contract for the last several years. For this reason, the Procurement Review Committee is recommending that we proceed to renew the contract with these 14 companies at the unit service rates that I've shown in the renewal pricing schedules. Third on the agenda is a bid for office paper and envelopes. This contract would be effective April 1st through March of 2016, and it provides 4 annual renewals. All items in the bid are delivered within 3 business days after receipt of a purchase order, and prices in the spreadsheet include shipping and handling and setting in place within the facilities. There is an escalator clause also in the contract that allows for price review twice a year. Prices, as shown, are fixed through June 30th of 2015. I was pleased when I compared the bid prices to our current prices. They're on average 14% lower, and also the quantities in the bid that were based on recent purchases are reduced by about 9% over the bid from 5 years ago. So the schools and offices are working to reduce paper purchases. This contract is recommended to be awarded in its entirety to Expedex, a Veritiv company, at an annual estimated total of $309,170.06. This total amount includes the collective purchases by all the schools and offices in the print shop in the past year. And Expedex is providing most of these same products to us under our current contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Freeman. Require a motion on this item?
Madam President, I move to approve the purchase of 8 10-pack, which amounts to 80 iPads from Apple Inc. At a total cost of $29,920. They are requisitions number 180536, 180579, 180605, and 180647. Also, move to approve the on-call architectural and engineering services, RFP number 2013-33, for various companies at a price of $367,114.16. And finally, purchase of office paper and envelopes, bid number 2015-35 from Expedex, at a total cost of $309,170.06.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gesford. Discussion, questions? Seeing none, we'll move to the question. Mr. Ridenour's motion to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor? 6-0. Thank you, Ms. Freeman.
Thank you very much.
So the next item under consideration is the first reading of proposed changes to policy ILB, test security. Mr. Trotta. Mrs. Markovic, welcome.
Good afternoon. The Policy Committee, in consultation with staff that coordinates security for tests that are administered to students, reviewed policy ILB, which is entitled Test Security. Based upon that review, the Policy Committee has two recommendations. The first is that the policy be placed in the proper format as provided by Policy BG. The second is that a sentence should be added to the policy that states that the superintendent is authorized to establish procedures to ensure the integrity of the testing process. In the event the board approves the proposed changes to this policy, staff will then conduct a review of the administrative regulation that accompanies this particular policy. We're glad to respond to questions that you might have.
Looking for a motion to approve the first reading of proposed changes to policy ILB entitled Test Security.
Madam President, I move for the approval of the first reading of proposed changes to policy ILB, test security.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. A second is required.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Ridenour, questions? Colleagues? Seeing no questions before us, we'll move on to Dr. Harding's motion. All those in favor? None opposed, 6-0. Thank you. Next under consideration is the Board of Education's draft FY 2016 general fund budget. Dr. Wilcox and Mr. South, our Chief Financial Officer, will lead the discussion and presentation.
Thank you, members of the board, members of the community, and those of you who are in the audience. Mr. South is going to walk us through the proposed superintendent's budget, which we are now prepared to hand to the board. I want to share with the board that the plan presents a balanced budget. The plan is sustainable over time, and we have gone to every effort to protect the classroom. I would also share with you that it contains a very small pool of salary adjustments or correctment dollars. It does not, however, contain the needed resources for either step increases for our employees or other salary enhancements, which quite honestly are well deserved. This budget is in fact very austere. It is not what any of us would like to offer the board or indirectly to our colleagues, but it is grounded in the reality of today. Our enrollment is declining, our resources are limited, and our challenges are increasing. To understand our approach to this budget, we've broken it apart really into three distinct phases, which I've gone over with this board previously. That is to prepare a balanced budget, to look at new challenges and solutions to those challenges, and then to address the issues of compensation. We've shared our thinking with the board, and we have also made adjustments based on that sharing to this budget. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to kind of walk the board through the assumptions that were made and the documents. Chris?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilcox. Good afternoon, Madam President, members of the board. On February 17th, the board met in a work session during which the superintendent and his staff presented the superintendent's draft budget for fiscal year 2016. As Dr. Wilcox had mentioned, that budget was developed using a three-tiered approach. Tier 1 reflected a reduction in revenue of $1.9 million, plus necessary continuing incremental expenditures of $2.9 million, giving us a total shortfall of $4.8 million going into fiscal year 2016. This tier also detailed $4.8 million in proposed budget adjustments and eliminations to cover this shortfall and make the system whole. Tier 2 showed nearly $1.3 million in new educational initiatives, along with a plan to cover those costs. And finally, Tier 3 at that time presented a proposed $1.0 million salary resource pool and demonstrated how the system would pay for it. Over the weekend, you received the superintendent's recommended budget. This budget maintains Tiers 1 and 2 as originally presented. However, the board expressed concern about several cuts to student programs that would have been necessary to fully fund the $1 million salary pool in Tier 3. Therefore, the superintendent has removed those cuts from his final recommended budget. This reduces the proposed salary resource pool to $561,000. This budget, as Dr. Wilcox mentioned, is balanced. It's balanced at $257,382,789. And it's very important to note that that amount is approximately a $2 million reduction from the current year's budget. Finally, the staff provided board members with an additional schedule yesterday afternoon. As you know, the county's maintenance of effort requirement for fiscal year 16 is $743,500 lower than the current year due to a decrease in enrollment. This additional schedule that we provided details how Washington County Public Schools would propose to use the $743,000 should the commissioners opt to restore that lost funding as non-recurring cost. We urge the board to include this information in its budget request to the commissioners. All of that being said, staff respectfully requests your approval to accept the superintendent's recommended budget as the board's draft fiscal year 2016 general fund budget. Of course, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. South. Looking for a motion to adopt the Board of Education's draft FY 2016 general fund operating budget.
Madam President, I move to adopt the Board of Education's draft FY 2016 general fund operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. Discussion, questions? Yes, sir.
This is just a point of information, Mr. South. The drop, what you mentioned, what was the number again for the drop in state funding? It's down here. Is it?
The reduction in state funding?
Yes.
Reduction in state funding is approximately $1.8 million.
1.8, that's what I thought. Okay. The other thing, and I don't know if you know this or maybe Dr. Michael would know this, the number of students we are down that impacts this budget that we are working on.
We lost 212 students in the official count as of September 30th. My understanding is that in addition to that 212, since the 30th of September, we are down another 140 students for a total of approximately 350 student reduction.
So,
Chris, excuse me. I think one of the things, we have recovered some of that group of students. I think we're at about 50 now.
I apologize.
But the 212 is absolutely correct.
and the 212 is what impacts this budget.
This budget.
This budget.
But
We're
the
already,
50,
yes.
the 50 would impact
Next budget.
2017.
That's correct.
Okay. So when Dr. Wilcox mentioned sustainable, that's something we have to consider as we move forward, because every child that we lose is going to impact the amount of revenue that we receive from our funding authorities.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Brightman.
Questions?
Mrs. Brightman?
Yes.
Thank you. A few comments I'd like to make. First is to emphasize that this is the board's draft budget. This is not final approval of the budget. A budget we adopt today as our draft is what we take to public comment and the public hearing next week, which provides any member of the community, public, whoever, an opportunity to provide us comments and feedback. We then have another opportunity, even if we amend it today or don't amend it, we have another opportunity to amend it when we consider it for final approval, which would be on March 17th. Second thing I'd like to comment on is this is the superintendent's recommendation to the board. This is the budget that he believes he needs in order to fulfill his responsibilities by his contract to the board and to the community. So that's his recommendation. Once approved by us as a draft, the budget becomes ours, and that's our opportunity to add, subtract, change, act on as we as a governing body choose. So if we wanted to eliminate programs, if we wanted to add programs, if we wanted to add staff, if we want to remove staff, this is our opportunity to do that over the next 2-week period. So that's just a little bit of summary for the public so they understand exactly where we are in this process, and so that the public understands what our both opportunities and obligations are as board members as we move through this process. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about some of what's been written regarding staffing. I know there was an article in the paper a few weeks ago that talked about eliminating 23 positions in this budget. And while that may strictly be true, I decided to go and look back through this budget and the planning for this year to see really where that process put us in terms of staffing compared to where we were a year ago. And I'm just going to walk through some of the numbers. I think they're all on the sheets that we've been provided, the reconciliation sheets, the Tier 1, 2, and 3. And just to have you, Mr. South, and Dr. Wilcox, check me if I'm wrong in some of what I'm seeing here. So just comparing to where we were a year ago today in terms of our staffing. In last year's budget, which was approved, we added 5 contingency teacher positions.
Correct.
And if I'm correct, all 5 of those positions have been filled.
Correct.
And all 5 of those positions continue to be included in the FY16 recommended budget from the superintendent.
Correct.
Also in the FY15 budget, we added 4 new teachers. Those were the mentor teachers.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And those positions were all filled, and we currently have individuals working in those positions, and those positions are also recommended to be funded in the FY16 budget from the superintendent.
That's correct.
During the FY15 school budget year, so since the last budget was adopted and now, we have also added 4 additional teachers to meet the demands of various things throughout the school system. And those are located as part of the Tier 1 costs, and I'll just read what those are. Those include a middle school art teacher, an elementary intervention teacher, and 2 itinerant ELL teachers. Is that correct? All those positions were filled.
That's correct.
During this past school year. So if I add those together, we have a total of 13 new teaching positions added over the last year. That's 5 contingency teachers, 4 mentor teachers, and 4 that are included in this document. That makes 5, 4, and 4 makes 13. So in the FY16 draft budget, there are, to fill the Tier 2 needs, there's a recommendation to eliminate 11 teaching positions, 11 teacher positions.
That's correct.
Okay, so if I just take what's been added in the last year and then subtract the 11 in Tier 2 in this budget, we're still net 2 additional teaching positions as compared to a year ago today, if I just consider those.
That's correct.
And that's to provide instruction for a student population that's down about 1.2%. So we have, according to the numbers you just gave, about 260 fewer students today than we had a year ago, and we have 2 more teachers teaching them.
If you net it all out, yes.
If we net them all out. So while, yes, you can say that there are positions being recommended to be reduced in this budget, I don't think it's fair to just look at that outside the context of what we've done with our teaching staff over the last year. That leaves us 9 other positions that are being recommended for reduction, and those are 9 positions that would be eliminated in order to create the salary pool. Now, this is the superintendent's recommended budget, but the only reason the salary pool is in there, and the only reason it's in there at the amount that it is because the board directed the superintendent to create a salary pool. His original drafts of his budget didn't include that pool. The board directed him to do that. He brought back to us a recommendation to create that $1 million salary pool, and he said that in order to do it, he thinks this is what he would have to do. 9 teaching positions were a part of that discussion. So I would argue when you look at all of this, with the Tier 1 recommendations and what we've done in the last year, we're a net plus 2 teachers. Because the board told the superintendent create a salary pool, he came back and said, if you want me to do that, here's the way I would do it, by eliminating another 9 teaching positions. If you net all of that out, we're down a net 7 over the last year. Again, to address a student population that has been reduced by 260 students. So if you look at 25 students per class, let's just say 25 students per class, a net of -7 teaching positions would address a student enrollment of 175 students. We're down 260. So we've lost, any way you measure it, even with the salary pool, we've lost far more students than are being recommended to eliminate teaching positions. So I just wanted to get that out there because, you know, I know it makes for flashy discussion to say 23 positions being recommended for elimination. But I think when you put it in the context of what's been added, of the students that we've lost, and the fact that 9 of those positions are really only there because the board told the superintendent to create a salary pool, it puts all of that in a slightly different perspective. So I just wanted to share all of that because I think it's important for the public to understand really what is happening as we manage our teaching force to meet the needs of our students. I put a lot out there, a lot of numbers. Mr. South, if I've mischaracterized anything or said anything that's not correct, Dr. Wilcox, if my numbers aren't correct or I'm not characterizing correctly what's happened, I hope you'll let me know.
I don't believe you've misstated anything.
I agree.
Madam President, I do want to ask a question, but I cede
Let me
until
see-
everybody has gone
Let
through.
me see if any of our other colleagues want to first go at the budget.
I have some questions, but let Mr. Ridenour ask his question.
Mr. Ridenour.
Thank you. Just to dovetail on Dr. Harding's comments, which he did put it together very well. Mr. South, what, again, this year is our percentage, what is the percentage of our budget, of this budget, that is salary and benefits? People cost, approximately, because I know you can't give me a...
Salary and benefits are approximately 75%. When you put the contracted personnel in also, it comes up to about 85%.
Okay, so it's 80, our people costs are approximately 85%.
Approximately 85%.
And I think, you know, just to simplify that, you know, for anyone and everyone, for every dollar that we spend, 85 cents of it goes to people.
That is correct.
Now, how would that compare, say, to last year? I mean, since is it a little bit more, a little bit less,
It's about the same percentage.
about the same?
On a-
Okay.
When you get,
Yet we have-
when you get to a budget the size of ours, you have to
Exactly.
make some
But
major
we have
changes
fewer
to make a
people.
swing at a percent.
Right, we have fewer people, and we're still spending approximately the same thing. Okay. And I think it's important to know that, that gives the superintendent and this board 15% of that budget to do just about everything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Williams, are you ready?
I am.
Okay.
Yes, looking at page 29 of 40, facilities maintenance programs, line item 30, building renovations, we're showing $530,000. Just wondering what that amount is.
That is the $530,000 is all of those accounts that you're looking at are contracted services. So that would be renovations that would be supplied via contractors when the maintenance department needs to call someone in for a project that they might not necessarily have either the expertise or the number of people needed to get a project done in a timely manner, and it's contracted out. That would come out of that line.
Okay, and does that happen often, that we have that need? And will we be having that need coming up in this next year, in 2016, that we would
Yes.
need
and
those services?
The next couple board meetings, you're going to see a number of projects coming forward. North High Health Suite, Clear Spring Health Suite, and weight room renovation, some renovations to Marshall Street. We use that capital-like money. It's not from the state. It's all local money in our operating budget. And we use it for those types of purposes that aren't state-driven projects.
Okay, thank you. May I continue? May I have
Absolutely.
another? Okay. Page 8 of 40, and I believe the line item is 44. Instructional substitutes, $1,650,000.
Ma'am.
Just looking at that as compared to the actual in FY14, I see a difference of $382,890, and I'm thinking back that we complimented our teachers on the fact that we used fewer substitutes in this past year, and yet we're saying that we'll have the need to have this much money in our budget to be able to handle that, or are we expecting the need for substitutes for a special project of some kind?
If you look back at 13, at the actual for fiscal year 13, you'll see it was about 1.5 million. The actual for 14 was down a little bit. If that trend continues, we certainly would adjust that budget number, but as you see, we budgeted 1.65 million in the current year, and we're going to continue that budget in the subsequent year. If the trend stays down, we certainly would make that adjustment. But 1 year, while that's good news, 1 year does not a trend make. So we tend to watch trends for 2 or 3 years before we pull a trigger on an adjustment that large.
Okay, so as a follow-up, so we did put money this year into the fund balance that was a result of unspent money that had been budgeted for substitutes, is that correct?
Last year.
That would have been in fiscal year 14. There was unspent money. That was,
Right.
I can't, while dollars are not, it's hard to identify what dollars went to the fund balance. I just off the top of my head don't recall whether that money was dropped to the fund balance or whether it was used somewhere else in the budget.
Okay.
But dollars are fungible, so you could make that argument.
Okay, that seems to, does anyone else on the Finance Committee remember the discussion where money was saved for substitutes and that went into the fund balance?
Dr. Hardings?
Yeah, I do
is on
recall
the
that
Finance
discussion, and
Committee.
there was a reduction in that budget line. Now, whether you can say that went to the fund balance or whether you can say that went to something else, that's, I think, what Mr. South is saying. You can't say that that dollar in particular went to the fund balance, but you're
Right.
correct that
There was a reduction
There
of
was a reduction, but
unspent money.
I would also remind the board that, well, Mr. South is right that 1 year does not a trend make. We also raised our substitutes' pay this year by 10%. So even if we are using fewer substitutes, if they're making more money, then you're going to have to budget for that as well. So that certainly has to figure into the line of questioning that you're pursuing.
This is right.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, you have to be careful when you read into conversations, but one of the things that, I've had teachers talk to me about is the money that goes to the fund balance, and what they say is that we park additional resources and lines in order to hide it from them in terms of negotiations processes or to have money to do the things that we want to do. The reality of the fact is that all of our budget lines have been rebalanced to 3-year actuals. So what you see here is an effort by this administration and by this finance officer and others to become much more accountable and much more transparent in our budgeting process. So, there are no lines where we have simply said, well, we're going to park $400,000 so we can get it later. This budget, as I said earlier, is an austere budget. When we, Dr. Hardings is right, we did raise the compensation level for substitutes, but also one of the things that you should be aware of is that our substitute usage lines are trending up. I think you can ask our Human Resource Director, who monitors this on a month-to-month basis. Her input into the budget was do not reduce this line further because right now I think we're running about 13% a day. Is that, Ms. Francisco, can you come up front? In terms of employee absences. So that's a difficult number for us then to project because we hope that we can move that number down in that line in particular because one of the things we're doing is we're incenting people through a process that we've developed internally to be at work. But Laura, can you speak to it?
Yeah, the attendance number fluctuates depending on the day. It has risen and fallen widely since school started, but we have added 160 plus subs to our pool since last year, and we continue to add because we continue to have attendance issues and we want to make sure every vacancy is covered.
But again, I will come back to, I see the reporter from the Herald Mail sitting here, so he's now going to check and see what our daily absence rate is. It's probably, I know we've had some days that have spiked at 13%.
Absolutely.
I don't think that that's our average across the year. We're probably running 7-8%, somewhere in there.
And I can actually confirm that when I go back.
If you would, it'd be good, because I don't want to mislead the board in that. But I do want to come back to the point that we rebalanced all of the budget lines with really one exception. And Chris, that was what?
Textbooks.
Textbooks, which we then pointed out to the board this time we rebalanced this year. So.
Very good. Mrs. Harshman hasn't had questions, or Mr. Gesford?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, due to the fact that my email wasn't working this week, I did submit questions, and of course, we just found out yesterday they didn't go through, so I do have quite a few questions here.
Absolutely.
On page 4 of 40, line item 13. I'm sorry, maybe page 3 of 40.
3 of
3,
40?
under business managers. Under high school, how many do we have
1.
of business managers?
1.
Just 1? Is that for all the schools or just in that one particular school?
Just the one particular school, it's North High.
North High. 31 of the same on 40, for page 40, 31, tech service contracts. Could you explain to me what that is?
Where are we?
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 31?
Page 4 of 40. 31 is the item. Line item 31.
4, line 31.
Those are service contracts in the technology area.
Just technology?
Yes.
On line item 33, under computer software,
What page, Mark?
same page.
Is that?
That's page 4 of 40, I'm sorry. We go from $360 in fiscal 14 to $100,000. What's the reason for the jump?
I don't know the answer to that.
It's a new program, but I will have to get back to you
Okay.
on that.
Where is it? I'm missing
Eric,
this because I don't have the numbers on it, Donald. What is it? Page
It's
3 or page?
page 4 of 40,
Okay.
and it's line item 33, computer software.
Mr. Sisler may know the answer to that.
Okay.
Double checking the document from last year, but I believe it's like a software used in evaluations of teachers.
Oh, it's Teachscape.
Yes,
It's
that's it.
Teachscape.
Teachscape.
Previously, that was paid for by a grant.
It was paid
Started
for by a
picking it up
grant.
in the general
We had
fund.
to absorb it.
Teachscape is the software that sits on top of the administrators' laptops or iPads when they go into a classroom to observe teachers, and it's tied to the Charlotte Danielson evaluation model.
Okay. Under the same page, 4, line item 39, communication schools, $690,000. What is that?
Telephones in the schools.
Telephones? Under testing and accountability programs, page 6 of 40. Line items 4, 5, and 6. Could you explain what the consultants do?
We've looked through the testing and accountability line and tried to right-size some of those. We've gone through a transition of using a company called PMI, and now we're using some different consulting services and software. So it's those types of things. We reduced some of the testing lines based on a couple of recent board purchases. VersaFit being one, but I'm not going to come up with the other one we just did a couple weeks ago. It's escaping me.
The main line is, as Dr. Michael mentioned, what used to be Performance Matters, PMI, and that's now VersaFit, and that's the main expense. It's the first research consultant line, the $123,000 line item.
And the second company that we use besides VersaFit is School City. Thank you, Mr. Hay.
Technology.
Facility capital outlay. I'm not sure what page that's on, if anyone happens to have that one.
Page 30.
30, thank you. Line item 15. What properties are included in this item?
It's the Barbara Ingram School.
Page 31, food service program, line item 2. Transfer to food services. Could you explain that one?
This is used to pay for children that are on free and reduced meals when they go to the outdoor school. I think the way the free and reduced meal program works, we can't charge that program while they're at the outdoor school.
We can charge the program, but only for breakfast and lunch. These cover the evening meals for those students when they're at outdoor school. that provides them the same opportunity as other students. They wouldn't be able to participate if we didn't have that line in there.
Well, I see that it was $13,870 in fiscal 14. It went up to $20,000. How many students are we sending? Are we increasing our student population up there?
We send all of our fifth graders, right?
Yeah, it's all of our fifth graders, and I think it's only those kids that do eat, and I guess we end up with an actual at the end. It's also to prevent food services to have to absorb that as a loss, and it also keeps our children from being embarrassed if they can't provide the resources to, we certainly want to see them eat while they're there.
We also raised our meal prices.
Yeah, we did raise our meal prices
Meal
as
prices
well.
also went up this year.
Okay.
And last year.
Yeah, they did both times. Yep.
The page 33, under elected board member services, line item 8, why are we increasing to $50,000 from $16,000?
$50,000, it was the budget. We're not necessarily increasing the budget. Actually, that budget was $100,000 a year or two ago, and we reduced that to 50 just based on actuals. That you can see in FY13 it was at 36,000, and then last year was kind of abnormally low.
Administratively, we've done a better job of keeping you to have outside counsel.
That's a line item that bounces up and down year to year, so that's a really difficult line to budget.
But you'll have to understand, I'm all new to this, so I'm asking
Right.
questions, so you'll have
That's
to
fine.
bear with me, so hopefully the next couple of years it won't be as bad. Under the executive leadership team, item 5,
What page?
page 34 of 40.
That's temporary clerical help that we employed during the crunch during the master plan preparation time.
Is that somebody you bring in from a temp service, or is it something that we just,
It's either a temp service or it's someone brought in temporarily from another location within the school system. I believe that we do have several folks who are sort of in on an as-available basis that come in for special projects like this. We have worked it both ways.
and then under that same page, line item 7, equipment rental. $10,000.
That's photocopy machines in the executive area, but that's probably needs to be transferred over into the tech area since that all of those machines have been transferred over to the responsibility of technology folks.
So is that something that would be reduced out to 0 then?
It would just be redeployed to a different line item.
Yeah.
The budget would be transferred to a different department, but that's what it covers, is photocopy.
Under same page, line item 22 and 23, subscriptions. Superintendent and the deputy superintendent.
That's dues and subscriptions, so that would be any kind of professional journals. It would be dues to professional societies, that sort of thing.
Where would we be able to find a copy of what that entails?
We could go in and do an account analysis for you on it. See who was paid on that. I'm not sure that there is a listing per se.
Be like the Herald Mail. Be like the Herald Mail and the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Under the superintendent's line, I do believe that is detailed in his contract, however.
Okay. under data and information under financial services line item 13, business support credit. Could you tell me what that is?
Business support credit is a line that is an accumulation of, that comes from multiple grants. The accounting department provides accounting services for all of the grants. And under most grants, they allow a business support credit. So essentially what that does is that brings dollars back into the accounting department to cover salaries of those accountants who provide accounting services to those federal and state grants.
Another time, it's often referred to as an indirect cost. The grant.
Mr. Gesford, could I interrupt just a moment? Mrs. Harshman, did you want to have a turn at some questions, and then we'll come back to Mr. Gesford?
Yes, I have a couple questions. This is not actually a question, but a clarification on page 8, line 31. It says additional pay SHS. Is that SHHS, South High, as opposed to Smithsburg? Okay. I just wanted to be clear on that. And over on the following page, line number 91, says tuition to other Maryland LEAs. What is that?
Those would be students who live in Washington County but go to school in other counties.
And we have students who do that?
Beg your pardon?
Yes.
I wasn't aware we had students who do that. How many do we have?
That would be for students, for example, we don't have a lot of students near county lines that go to other counties. But for example, if let's just say a custodial parent is living in Washington County and there's been a divorce, the custodial parent lives in Washington County, that custodial parent is incarcerated for whatever reason. The student goes to live with the other parent in Baltimore County. We are still responsible for that student's education because the custodial parent is a resident of Washington County.
So we've
got situations like that fall into that line. That's just one example.
We have not only that, but on the other end of it, we have probably 40 students who we are receiving in this county as well. And we have a monthly notice of who those students are, what their place of residence, what their high school would be.
I was just
So we
concerned
receive
about
money as well as send
the
money
ones
out.
that we were paying for.
Right.
And how many students does that usually cover?
I don't have that number. We can get that number for you.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Okay, and the last thing that I have is I would like to clarify a little bit, I believe, a misconception that has been published by the newspaper and also that was spoken here by Mr. Minor about the idea that some monies cannot be used for the teacher or employee pay, whereas it could be if it's not a recurring amount. In other words, it could be used as a bonus, so therefore that money would be available if it's not used for something else. So I wanted to be sure that that was out there because apparently we were in error in our understanding according to the newspaper, and I don't believe that's true. I think we understood perfectly the ability to use one-time money for a one-time bonus. So I think that's what some of our concern was for the amounts of money that are coming out with the budget. So thank you, and that's all I have to add.
Okay, Mrs. Williams?
Looking at page 8, 40, classroom instructional programs. The line items 73, 74, computer lab materials, small equipment, supplies. Were those to be part of the iLearn initiative, or what? Just wondering why.
Are you referencing the entire line, or are you referencing the increase? The increase is related to the technology plan.
The iLearn plan?
That's part of the $1 million that's in the budget.
Okay, those two line items?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that also true then of page 26, which would be tech service contracts, which is 21, 100% increase there?
Yes.
And the computer software as well, which is down further, line item 30?
Yes.
Yes, and then on page 27, tech equipment, line item 46, that also?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then page 40,
I think it's important to point out that the $1 million is part of the digital learning initiative. The other dollars that are there, which could be repurposed into the digital learning plan, are part of our tech expenses on an ongoing basis, which we referenced in this conversation as money that could be repurposed. But in the absence of a tech plan, those monies are still going to be spent for technology, as we have every year. I mean, we have an ongoing renewal where about every 7 years we're replacing all of our technology, which is really kind of an odd number when you think about it. But
That's correct.
so on page 40, the maintenance contracts, that would be line item 5, 52.38% increase to $275,000. That's also part of the iLearn.
which
Yeah,
page?
ma'am, that's
That's
part of the
40,
Tyler.
40.
That's for the Tyler Munis back
office.
annual maintenance on that new software.
Okay, so that's the maintenance contract for Tyler? Okay. So, Dr. Wilcox, what I hear you saying is that while this money, this part of this 1 million that's in here that was to be used for the iLearn will still stay here, but will be repurposed for other technology needs?
Yes,
As-
I would suggest that, because while we have spent, I think this year, a little over $2 million on technology, one of the things that we know is that we've not been able to reach all of the students or requests that have been made of us. So we would simply continue our process of renewing technology as we have been for, I don't know, probably since Dr. Morgan was here.
Mr. Gesford, are you ready with some other questions?
Yes. On page 8 of 40,
What's the top?
the topic would be classroom instructional programs. Line item is 27. Adult correction facility instruction. Could anyone explain that?
Yes. We have some students, Eric, do you want to go about it? Go ahead.
We're required by law to pay for the education of certain for students who are incarcerated. I guess that's the short answer.
And how many students do we have currently in that program?
I don't know currently. It fluctuates up and down.
What's the number? How much is it?
The budget is $7,500 for that line item.
And last year.
Is that what, one student?
Well, it doesn't equate to one student. It's for certain periods of time, and it's hourly wages. And
Well, last year was 219.
That comes in the form of a bill from the Department of Juvenile Services.
Okay,
So can I ask one?
go ahead.
So that jumped from $219 to $7,500?
but once again, we're back to three-year averages. The year previous, that was $6,375, and the year that
Right.
you don't have 12 would have obviously then been higher. So it just depends on how many kids are incarcerated.
Yeah, it probably would be good to have FY12 on here, too. That gives us a little background. Okay, thank you.
You had
Gesford.
You had indicated that there was a reduction at SHS?
South High
That's
School, yes.
South Hagerstown High School?
Yes.
Okay. What was that position? I couldn't remember what you were saying.
Wasn't a position, it was money that was allocated to after-school activities. Eric, we reduced I can't remember actually the name of the fund.
It's additional pay for after-school student supports.
I believe we reduced it by $75,000?
Yes.
Yes.
And the year before, we reduced it about that amount as well.
What do they do?
It could be tutoring, after-school activities.
So it's a teacher that's teaching?
It's not a teacher, it's teachers who turn in
Yes.
extra time.
It's additional salary.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like a program or something that we're running like karate or something.
No,
It's-
no, no.
It's for teaching.
It's predominantly in the math and English language arts departments.
Okay. So are we eliminating that altogether?
We're not eliminating it, we're reducing it.
Just reducing it, okay. Item 48 of the same page, equipment rental. $725,000 from $488,000.
That's the school copiers, but I believe that lease is up, so we were afraid to reduce that line item, not knowing what the new lease is going to be here in the near future.
Didn't we just lease a bunch of,
Those were the copiers for this building, but we're now looking at school-level copiers, and I believe that the RFP will go out later this week, if not early next week, and it's for 108 additional copy machines at the school level.
so all schools at one time, that'll be affected
It'll
by?
be a 5-year service contract, yes.
Okay. So that may be higher or lower.
Yes, it may.
Line item 73, a $400,000 increase.
That was one of, I think,
That was one of my
Mrs.
questions.
Williams' questions.
Oh,
That-
okay,
that
I'm
was
sorry, I
part
was
of the-
trying to get my stuff here, so
part of
I
the,
apologize.
That's part of the technology
Okay.
increase that we have in the budget.
On the dropout prevent travel, line item 77, what did we,
You on the same page?
Page 9
page
of 40,
9,
top of the page.
page 9,
That's just mileage.
just mileage?
Yes.
And then under 81, school enrichment activities, how will that affect the classroom teachers?
The school enrichment activities are one of the things that we had in Tier 3, if you recall. That's one of the things that we talked about 2 weeks ago at the budget work session. Those dollars are, that's $4.80 per student for each school. Money's used at the discretion of the principal, and in some cases, the principal actually brings that down to the school improvement team also to participate in how that money's used. Money's used for things like bringing in speakers for assemblies, helping students who may not have the financial means to be able to afford to go on a field trip. Those kinds of miscellaneous things that come up in a school from time to time.
Do we typically have a surplus at the end of the year for now, or do they typically use it all up?
That money is transferred to the schools. It doesn't stay on our books.
Okay.
It's actually transferred to the schools.
So help me understand what happens to that money at the end of the year. Is it just they bank it for the next year?
That's correct. It carries over for the next year.
Okay. Page 10 of 40, targeted instruction. Line item 5, what is an ELL?
English language learner.
And why a $100,000 increase? Thank you.
We have more.
There were 2 additional teachers that were brought on board this past fall, and we're adding those positions to the budget for next year since they're here to provide services to our growing foreign language speaking population.
In particular, it's Spanish-speaking students.
Spanish, okay.
Those were two of the teachers that Dr. Hardings mentioned in his analysis of the hires, the increases and decreases in the teaching ranks.
Do they float to different schools, or are they in the same school each year?
I believe these two are at targeted schools where we have an influx of kids, but I can double-check that.
I think Dr. Wilcox is right, but some of them do float from school to school where they don't have a large caseload.
Okay. Page 11 of 40, Career Tech Program, contracted services, the increase of 76,000. Line item 18. Contractual trades education, from $23,000 to $100,000.
That's ABC, right? That is the Bar Institute that is run by Associated Builders and Contractors. That's the budget for that. We have certain trades that we do not offer at the technical high school, but if a student wants to participate in one of those trades, we do pay their tuition at the Bar Institute. So that fluctuates up and down depending upon the number of students who opt to go into things that we don't offer, things like plumbing, welding, things like that we don't offer at the technical high school.
So are we anticipating an increase this year from 23,000 up to 100,000? It's a pretty big jump.
That's a budget that was established some years ago, and we've left it at $100,000 because of students moving into and out of the program. It's another one of those areas that's difficult to judge what you're going to need in any one particular year, but it might be an area we might want to look at.
Page 13 of 40, school library program, line item 5, structural substitutes. We've increased the budget. From 26,000 to 44,000.
That again is going to relate to the increase in sub pay.
I'm sorry.
That again is going to relate to the increase in substitute pay.
Substitute pay. And then the same page, line item 10, equipment. For fiscal 14, we were at $1,437, and we've now increased it to $20,000. Are we anticipating an increase?
Yeah. Again, if you look at 13, the number was the FY13. The number was almost 18,000. I don't know what FY12 was because we don't have that number here, but again, that was one of the numbers that one of the line items that we did do a 3-year smoothing on, 3-year averaging on. So it's likely that the year prior to that was fairly high. So yes, that's
okay. Page 15 of 40, school counseling program. Line item 5, additional employment.
That is for summertime, normally scheduling. Counselors come in and do some scheduling over the summer.
Are they our teachers?
Yes,
They're counselors.
It's for our guidance counselors. It's a specific number of pays depending on whether they're at the elementary, middle, or high school for guidance counselors to do scheduling.
Okay.
Mike?
You will also remember, Mr. Gesford, that this was one of the numbers that we had in the Tier 3 budget that you instructed us to put back.
Right.
Is this,
Mr. Gesford has the floor. If you'd
Go
like
ahead.
to let
Thank you.
other
Go ahead,
people
Karen.
have a round, we can. Mr. Ridenauer, you've only had one chance to ask questions. Okay, Mrs. Harshman,
thank you.
you're welcome.
I was wondering about the counselors. Are they not on a 11-month schedule? The ones that do the scheduling, are they not 11 months, or aren't they already paid for the extra month for scheduling?
They've always been 10-month plus additional days, as Dr. Wilcox pointed out, different number of days for elementary, middle, and high, and sometimes depending upon the school.
But I thought the high school counselors were on like an 11-month. I don't know why, I guess because they were always there, but I thought they were on an 11-month schedule, not the high schools.
I think their days are paid per diem, but I don't think they're on 11-month contract.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
Mrs.
you,
Williams,
Mr.
do you have any
Gaspar.
additional questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Mr. Gesford?
Page 29 of 40, line item 30, building renovations. Again, what was the decrease of $500,000? I think we talked about that. I just didn't write the note down. I'm sorry.
Right, it's a decrease of $500,000 for capital-like projects. This is the money that we use to do a variety of projects that aren't state-funded.
That are not state-funded?
Correct.
This was in particular for retrofitting the 701 Frederick Street building for academic programs and changing it away from being used for maintenance purposes.
That's why you have the $500,000 decrease.
Correct.
We did that project. We increased that budget by $500,000 for FY15, and now that it's completed, that $500,000 is no longer needed, so it's being reduced back to what it was for prior years.
And I'd like to thank my colleagues for letting me take the time. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Gesford. Any other questions or comments before we go to the motion before us? All right, the question is on Mr. Ridenour's motion. All those in favor to adopt the Board of Education's draft FY 2016 General Fund Operating Budget as presented by the Superintendent. Very good, 6-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Wilcox, any additional, we're sort of to your update. Anything you would like to add at this point?
I don't think so.
All right.
Thank you.
We have personnel actions. Thank you, Ms. Francisco.
Mrs. Brightman, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board, as discussed earlier in closed session, there are several personnel actions for your review and approval this afternoon.
Thank you. Requires a motion.
Madam President, move to accept staff recommendation as presented. Personnel recommendations, excuse me.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Dr. Hardings. Questions, comments? All those in favor? 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
That brings us to reports to the board. The first.
Excuse me, before you leave, Laura did take a look at attendance, one of the things that we talked about earlier. Our highest absence rate was 16% of our professional staff out on one day. That was October 10th. August 20th, which was one of the early days of school, was our lowest absence rate at about 3%. And absent that, we've been in and out. December, we averaged 8% of our professional staff out. January was also about 8%. So we're running about 8% a day for our professional staff.
Average.
What was happening on October 10th?
That's a really good question.
I'm just
I
curious.
do not know. It was a Friday. Beyond that, I cannot tell you.
Interesting.
So we continue to watch that data on a weekly basis. So we'll keep the board informed as how we're running against the budget as well.
Thank you. All right, moving on again, reports to the board, the 2015-2024 enrollment forecasts. We have several people here, Chad Criswell, Senior Project Manager and Planning Supervisor, and Deanna Newman of Public Pathways, Inc. Welcome.
President Brightman, Vice President Hardings, Superintendent Wilcox, member of the board. I'm here today with Deanna Newman of Public Pathways Incorporated to present the 10-year enrollment projections. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Deanna and let her do most of the talking.
Last year I was here and you had the dogwood blooming behind you that are so beautiful. Yes, they made me come in March, so I don't get to see it this year.
You can come back in the spring.
Well, there, I'd love that. It was gorgeous. I come here every year. This is my 10th year, I looked back, that I've been doing your enrollment projections. I do them pretty much the same way that is a standard practice nationally, and that is that I use a cohort survivorship method, which is a trend analysis. I'll talk a little bit about how that trend works. It's a little different from looking from year to year, first grade to first grade. I look at housing starts, at birth information to supplement the trends so that I am aware of what's kind of going on around. One of the nicest things that's happened to me over the last couple of years is that the GIS capability here in the county has improved dramatically. And it's very, very helpful. It helps me to know what the matriculation is from 6th grade to 7th grade or from 8th grade to 9th grade as it goes into the various different high schools. It helps when we look at magnet programs, at the homeless population. The information that's coming now from your facilities planning department over GIS has been a great help, I think. Using that information, well, first let me talk a little bit about this year. This year was the first year that we have lost enrollment. I'm surprised. I'm surprised because it's the first year since 2000 that we actually have lost enrollment. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised because I didn't anticipate it. I had projected that we would be same old, that we would actually be about the same place this year as we were last year, and so it was a bit of a surprise to me, and it's worth taking a look at because I think it does impact what we're going to expect over the next 6 to 10 years as well. Looking again at, let's just start with elementaries because I think that's where we really saw the biggest change. I expect to be within 0.5% at the elementary, middle, and high level in terms of the projections. And with the elementary schools, instead of having about the same number of children, we actually lost 133, and it's important. I think we sit down and take a look at that. When I look at a survivorship methodology, what I do is I look at, maybe I'm going to look at here rather than keep looking behind me. I look at what goes on between first and second grade and then what goes on between second and third in order to be able to develop a projection. They call it a survivorship, how many first graders become second graders. And really what we're looking at in those in-between years is more in-migration or out-migration into the school district at a grade level point. And so the other piece that's going to be driving the enrollment projection, though, also is what we call kind of that natural progression. How many fifth graders leave and how many kindergartners come in to take them. So there's two parts of the forecast that we're really looking at projecting. In this particular case, you'll see that in 2014, our rollover, or our natural progression, that is the number of fifth graders who left and the number of kindergartners came in, was probably the big story here. And that is that we lost about 165 as a result of that natural projection. We also saw no in-migration, despite the fact that we saw housing of about 370 new starts in the previous year. We would have thought to have seen, based on our student yield information, some in-migration as a result. Looking a little bit at births, we talked about births, in fact, for the past 2 years. We've known that it's been coming. During the economic recession, people stopped having babies. The birth rate in this country, the number of births in this country, dropped to its lowest rate since World War II. We saw that all over. And
For us, that meant that we lost, over the course of 3 years, about 230 students in our kindergarten. Well, they, of course, become 230 students in first grade and 200 in second grade, and we get this very low trough, actually, that moves through the system, almost kind of like the reverse of a little boomlet. We see the other thing around. Unlike a boomlet, though, we actually were expecting that there would be an increase in births once the recession was over with. And instead, I think what we found is that the generation that is now our teenagers in our high schools, they're also our cohort of teachers that are now entering our system, but they're also the people who would normally be having their babies right now, the Generation Y or the millennials. They're getting married late and they're having their babies late. And so there is actually a bit of a lag that's going on in terms of births, that we are not seeing any quick recovery. When I look at the number of births, both that have been recorded and the number that are being projected by the state, they're projecting it to be flat for the next 5 to 6 years. So the loss that we see of the 230 babies that weren't born this 5 years ago is something that's going to continue over the next couple of years. The other thing that we're seeing, and the other thing that I look at, how do I go backwards? Oh, here I go. So the other thing that I look at is the, okay, let me see what I got here, is the ratio between the number of babies that were born 5 years ago and how many show up in the 5th grade 5 years later. I mean, excuse me, in the kindergarten 5 years later. If we have no growth in the county, that number will be under 1. So there will be fewer children that show up in kindergarten than were born 5 years prior. Some of it is mortality. Some of it is that children have other choices. They go into private school, they are homeschooled. That number almost inevitably is going to be under 1. It was over 1 back in the mid-2000s, but because we had had 5 years of growth, we had more people living in the county 5 years later. And so it was 1.4. In fact, at 1 year, it was actually 1.9. Last year, we had anticipated that that number would stay somewhere around 0.91, 0.92. In fact, this year, the number dropped again. So in addition to having another 230 students fewer in our kindergarten, the ratio of births to kindergarten actually dropped down to 0.8. What that did is it meant that our kindergarten was quite a bit under that we had anticipated, about 115 under than what we had actually anticipated as a result. It'll have implications as we look out into the future in terms of what we anticipate. Projecting the kindergarten is one of the hardest things that we do. Maybe when we have universal pre-K, we might be able to project kindergarten a little bit better, but by then we'll be having trouble projecting our pre-K. It's because we just don't know quite where those students are. We do the best we can. Typically, you can see that it has been fairly predictable over the years, somewhere around that 0.9, 0.91. As we look forward and we think, though, about what's going to happen with our kindergarten, I thought maybe I would point out some of the volatility that we see in kindergartens and how difficult it becomes to project from there. One of the things you'll see here, for example, is Bester. Bester had a kindergarten 1 year of 79, the next year of 98, the next year of 68, and the next year of 106. Now, Bester may actually be seeing a little bit of what we call new school mystique. A lot of times when we modernize or build a new school, suddenly there are a lot more students who want to go to that school. It usually lasts for a couple of years. It's hard, though, to determine whether this is a trend or this is a one-time thing. Typically, what I'll do is I'll weigh out the two numbers and actually project somewhere in between. But you'll see that takes place with Lincolnshire up at 121 last year, down to 88 this year. At Winter Street, 63 last year, 45 this year. The kindergartens can go up and down. In the middle schools, we basically, again, we saw no in-migration into the middle schools despite new housing. Our rollover, we had anticipated. The nice thing is we do know what the fifth grade is and how they will come into the sixth grades. But we did see a loss in our middle schools as well. And we saw a loss in our high schools. I'm sorry. And we saw a loss in our high schools, most of it. As we look at the ninth grade coming in, we would have thought we would have broken even. Instead, we actually saw more out-migration in between the grades. So our high school numbers are down overall across the board, which is the one reason why we show a loss in the grades. We try to tie housing to our forecast, to new enrollment, and we, as part of our APFO, assume that new housing will bring new enrollment into the school district. If you look at the chart right here, what you'll see is that in the brown would be the new housing starts, ranging somewhere between 160 and 350, but in the green is the enrollment change as a result of in-migration the next year, and it's totally random. There is no connection in the short term between housing at this level and the in-migration that we see in our schools the following year, at least not district-wide. It's a conundrum. It's one that, again, our APFO is kind of based on that concept that there will be a yield. And it may be that there's a lot of other things going on. There's a lot of static out there. For example, the Census Bureau tells us that we have 4,000 empty housing units in the Washington, Hagerstown area.
4,000?
4,000.
Single family?
They are units, housing units. Right. About, at any given time, 600 to 700 are actually for sale. 1,200 are actually up for rent. Another 2,000 are in some varying degrees of, I don't know, foreclosure or just empty because somebody's holding on to it. But just generally, if we have 4,000 vacant units and we're tracking 350 new housing starts, it's kind of understandable that that the relationship is just not tight enough for us to be able to use that. I do believe that when we had 1,000 new housing starts a year, it mattered. That we could actually see the implications, but it may be at 350 new housing starts, it simply isn't a big enough number to take care of the rest of the static. Again, I think the assumptions this year are pretty similar to last year. I think we're assuming that housing starts are going to remain somewhere around 300 for at least the next 3 years. And I always look at the next 3 years closely, and then at the out years, I can assume a little bit more growth as it's anticipated. But if they aren't out there doing infrastructure right now, it's hard to assume that they would be impacting our schools within the next 3 years. The kindergarten enrollment, I think, was at its lowest this year. I think it will hover for a couple of years before it actually begins to start up. According to the state, they anticipate that our kindergarten by 2020 will be back up to where it was 2 years ago. So it'll be a slow increase. I am assuming that few students are going to leave high school based on state legislation. And that right now I am showing a pre-K increase next year based on information that I have been given regarding the program, but I don't show increases beyond that. So the enrollment forecast for the elementaries, as you can probably anticipate, is either no growth or some decline as those smaller grades go through and larger fifth grades leave. Pretty much by 2020, very little, but if you look at the elementary enrollment beyond 2020, it does grow quite dramatically, actually, several hundred a year. Middle school growth, very similar, pretty static as the smaller grades come through, that the middle schools will either be a little above or a little bit below where they are every year. And similar with the high schools, a little bit of decline again next year, a little bit of growth up and down for the most part, but over the course of the 6 years, very, very little growth. I don't actually project special schools, but I put them here so that we don't forget that we have 2 special schools that we keep track of. I just assume that they'll hover around where programmatically you want them to be. Total enrollment growth, as I said, across elementary, middle, and high. However, I am showing that by 2024, just 4 years beyond that, we will grow about 800 students. That's because as kindergartens increase, the elementaries will begin to increase during that period. I also have anticipated that there is some growth in, say, the Boonesboro area, growth down in the southern part, in some other areas, pretty much pocketed growth, Morgansville, a few other places that we can anticipate as the economy improves, that they too will start to grow as well. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Open for questions, comments?
Mrs. Bright?
Yes.
I'll just ask a couple. Thank you for the presentation. I mean, is the headline here that people are moving out of the county?
I've looked at some census information on just that, and the census information between 2010 and 2014 says that says no, people are not moving out, but it did say there were fewer households. So it's really very borderline. The answer is I think people are not going anywhere. It had population growth at about 440, or it was a very, very small number over the last 4 years.
As I thought as you were speaking, it sounded like there were 2 components to the decline in enrollment. One is the smaller number of kindergarten students.
Right.
And the other one is the lack of survivorship from grade to grade.
Right.
Which to me is either they're moving out or they're making other arrangements for their students' education.
I think that one of the possibilities is, and Chad and I were just looking at that, is that there might be a growth in the private school enrollment this year. So it may be that one of the reasons that we didn't grow, that we had basically out-migration. And you're right, if you look at those numbers, we had out-migration from the school district. That it may be that there was some growth associated with the private schools.
Do you have data on that, or that's?
We have data, but it's unofficial enrollment.
From MSDE, they do a study of the non-public schools. I just go back to try to see, if they're all of a sudden up 1,000 students, I want to know it because that's going to have an impact on our enrollment. This year's data has not been made public yet, but from an unofficial source that looked at 27 schools, which is the same number that MSDE recorded, it appeared they were up by about 500 students. Now, the numbers are still lower, though, than what they were back in 2006, 2007, when those numbers were much higher. But it looks like there might have been an increase this year. The exact number I hate to give you because I'd like to go apples to apples officially, but I'll keep track of it, and when I have that, I'll prepare that and provide that to Dr. Wilcox.
But it is sufficient to show that, to take our in-migration that we had anticipated, I think.
Okay.
And it may be that they're filling vacancies, as Chad points out, that became vacant during the economic recession. They still have those vacancies, and they're now beginning to fill them as people are feeling comfortable enough to pay.
Right. Well, thank you. I mean, as you know, this drives a lot for us. As you saw from the budget discussion we just had, I mean, the subtext of all of that is the numbers of students that we didn't have this year that we had last year. So.
And if no schools have closed since in the past few years, there's still some available space in those private schools.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any additional questions? just to follow on to Dr. Harding's, do you see what's occurring in Washington County as any kind of statewide trend or regional trends or pockets? I've heard from colleagues throughout the state that other school systems are losing enrollment as well. And the way the state formula is written, as you lose enrollment, artificially your wealth appears to be going up, which then works against us as well on our per pupil funding. So it's one of those, and we have 50% free and reduced population, and yet we, because the 212 student drop, all of a sudden we're now wealthier. So help me understand if this, do you do other counties? Are your
The only other
colleagues?
Most of my counties are urban, and actually the urban counties are doing quite well.
They're growing.
And so I don't know if that's a trend in terms of, again, this millennial population tends to prefer urban environments. I have no idea whether, Prince George's County did not see a drop. I don't know about, I usually check Montgomery. I did not check them this year.
Montgomery County's increasing
Yeah,
significantly.
I do. I believe as the urban areas are increasing. Maybe housing became more affordable, but I believe it probably is a generational thing.
Because right now, these anomalies we're seeing at some of our schools makes it very difficult for our redistricting to sort of read the tea leaves on that. So as Chad knows, he leads that. So again, thank you very much. I always appreciate, and you're welcome back when the dogwoods are blooming.
Right, thank you.
We'll try to schedule that better next year, maybe. Any final questions, comments, Dr. Wilcox?
No, it's great.
Thank you. Okay. We're winding down here. There will be no legislative briefing. Mrs. Cade is not with us today. She is under the weather as well, and we will take up any legislative report during the next item, the board member committee reports. So, Mr. Trotta, he's there, great. Okay, we'll start to my left. Mrs. Harshman, Curriculum and Instruction.
Curriculum and Instruction is scheduled to meet Tuesday, March 24th at 12 o'clock in the boardroom. Apex is on the schedule, and we'll probably have a few other things on the agenda. Please check the website if you're interested in attending, and everyone is welcome.
Very good. Mrs. Williams, Facilities.
Yes, the Facilities Committee met on Tuesday, February 24th at noon. We had an update on the Jonathan Hager Elementary School. Good progress is being made there. We also had a presentation by Chad Criswell on the draft 2015 pupil generation rate. We had an update by Mr. Rollins on the EFMP. And we had a presentation by Mr. Criswell and some folks, some guests from the county, who, Mr. Rathon, I believe, Mr. Lucason, and a lovely lady by the name of Tabitha, whose last name I don't remember. And there was a nice article in the newspaper about the GIS system that's being used to allow parents and other members of the community to determine which schools would be their school of attendance, given an address that they would input into a computer system. We had an update on the 2016 Capital Improvement Program, and I think that pretty much sums it up. We will be meeting, the Facilities Committee will be meeting on March 24th at noon in Dr. Michael's conference room on the 3rd floor.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Mr. Gassford, Finance.
The Finance Committee will be meeting on March 24th at 10:45 in the 3rd floor boardroom unless we have a change of plans. But right now, that's where we plan to meet.
Mr. Ridenhour, HR.
HR is tentatively set to meet the 24th of March at, I think, 9 o'clock in the HR conference room.
And Dr. Hardings, could you stand in for Mrs. Fisher for policy?
Sure. The policy committee met last Tuesday on the 24th of February. We had a fairly long discussion about the food and allergy guidelines. We had a guest, not a guest, I guess a member of the community who's expressed some concerns about whether our policy or guidelines are robust enough and whether we need something, whether they need to be revised. Her name was Ms. Lucas. We had a very good discussion with the food and nutrition team, members of the policy committee, and Ms. Lucas. I think we pretty well concluded that no, we don't necessarily need a policy because this is very operational in nature. One of the things that I think we sort of concluded in the discussion with Ms. Lucas is that our food and nutrition services really do an excellent job of identifying students with potential allergies, of knowing how to manage the food and where the food is in the particular cafeteria to make sure the kids are safe. Where most of the concerns seem to be is where the kids weren't around food and nutrition services, so classrooms, buses, things of that sort, where kids bring a lot of different kinds of food and have food on buses, even though maybe they shouldn't. So there was a lot of discussion about that, and I think staff is going to go and continue to draft, take another revision at the guidelines that they've developed so far. We then had a discussion of the Family and Medical Leave Act policy, which came from the Human Resources Committee, so thank you for that. That will come back, I think, to the policy committee one more time before coming to the board for a first read. We reviewed the test security policy, which was on the committee or which was on the agenda earlier today. Our next meeting is going to be March 10th. That's next Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the board conference room. We discussed the agenda for the committee, and the committee has decided that we're first going to tackle the instructional policies and review that section of the policy manual this year. That's all.
Very good, thank you. Any other committees or reports from board members? Anything from MABE? Okay, we'll move on to the legislative response, and Mr. Trotta, could you start us off with that, please?
Certainly. The Board of Education has three primary initiatives that it's pursuing during this session, and we wanted to provide you with a brief overview of the status of each of those matters. The first is the reappointment of the superintendent exemption. The bill has cleared the Senate without any difficulty whatsoever. An amendment was offered that would require the state superintendent of schools to conduct a study to determine how the process of recruiting superintendents and retaining superintendents could be improved. The bill continues to move forward, and we'll keep you up to date on its progress. The next is the alternative certification bill. As you may recall, this is the bill that would allow for greater flexibility in the areas where there's critical shortage with teachers, and would allow the Board of Education to provide certification with regard to those particular critical areas. There are hearings scheduled next week. One is on Wednesday, and another hearing is on Thursday of next week. And finally, we have the alternative financing bill. This bill would have authorized the Board of Education to incur up to $10 million in financial obligations. The delegation looked at this bill and felt it required some further study. They've indicated that they want to look at a possible resubmitting this bill again during the 2016 legislative session.
Thank you. And any updates on the charter school and the post-Labor Day? I know we've given testimony or...
Right. We're tracking a number of bills, and we provide the members of the board with periodic reports on the status of those bills. One of the critical bills that's in during this session is referred to as the burden of proof bill. In due process proceedings, the Supreme Court has determined that the burden of proof in such cases should be on the party that is what they call the moving party. And in most cases, that is a parent who has brought a due process proceeding. The Supreme Court has determined that the parents should bear that burden. There's a bill in that would shift that burden to local boards of education. And if that bill does pass, it will be necessary to allocate additional money for litigation and also attorney's fees. So we wanted to bring that to your attention. We have filed a report opposing that particular bill. The other thing that we're concerned about with that bill is that it would divert the attention of educators from the classroom, and instead they would be involved in meetings and hearings and potential litigation matters. Moving next to the charter school bill, this is really a bill that, if it is enacted, will dramatically change the face of public education in the state of Maryland. The bill would change the funding mechanism for charter schools, and we believe it would, in fact, provide a charter school with more funding than a public school would receive. We believe that this measure, this part of the bill, is unconstitutional. We have submitted a report that indicates our concerns. Another aspect of the bill, which is very, very interesting, is that the charter schools would be given the autonomy to hire their own employees. Once they hire those employees could decide whether they want to be an employee of the charter school, whether they want to be an employee of the local Board of Education, or in the case if the charter is issued by the State Board of Education, they could become a state employee. We believe that this is not something that's permissible under the Maryland Constitution, as local boards of education should be permitted to employ their own employees, as should the State Board of Education. So we've noted this also in the legislative report that we filed with regard to this particular legislation. The other part of this bill is that the charter schools could seek a waiver of every legal requirement that a public school has to follow. And we question whether this is sound public policy, and if it is, why shouldn't the same privilege be extended to all public schools in the state of Maryland? If there's any new questions, I'll move on to the post-Labor Day bill. This bill would mandate statewide that every public school in Maryland must commence its school year after Labor Day. And we have a number of concerns about this bill. The primary concern is that the school calendar should really be something that is determined based on what's in the best interest of students. And secondly, what's in the best interest of the local community in establishing its own school calendar. We believe that there is a potential that the school year could end as late as the last week in June if this bill is enacted. And more importantly, students, in looking at the upcoming school year, students could lose 13 days of instruction by moving the calendar after the Labor Day, that we'd have 13 days less of instruction to prepare students for tests and other academic achievement tests.
Thank you, Mr. Trotta. Any further comments or questions? All right. Thank you very much. Moving into future agenda items, just a reminder, since we now have passed the draft budget, FY 2016 budget, it now is our budget. It no longer belongs to the superintendent, and this is when we take it to a public hearing, and that's on March 10th at 6:30. I believe it is scheduled for 2.5 hours is the normal amount of time under our policy. If there is any need after we get feedback from our budgeted advocacy and review committee, and certainly the public who can come to the public hearing, and we look forward to that conversation. There is another work session as a placeholder for March 17th if the board decides that we need to use that time. With that in mind, the approval of our budget is set for also that evening on March 17th, and then that allows us to own the budget, and then it goes forward to the county commissioners. So at this point, we will go down to board member comments. Mrs. Harshman.
No comments.
Mrs. Williams.
This morning I had the opportunity to be a guest reader at Hickory Elementary School, and I would like to thank Mrs. Kuna and Mrs. Becky Vance for the opportunity to visit Hickory and to read to a delightful group of fifth grade students in celebration of Dr. Seuss's birthday.
Excellent. Mr. Gesford?
I have nothing.
Thank you. Mr. Ridenour?
Yes, Madam President, I'd like to read this into the record. I will give Ms. Chekovic a copy of this at the completion of the meeting. Please bear with me after hearing Mr. Trotta's report. This does attach itself to that. Like many, I was disappointed that the delegation decided not to support our effort to have the authority to utilize alternative financing for special projects and public-private partnerships. It's my belief that there was an misunderstanding in the public as to the potential benefits this would have provided to our students and communities. I further believe that there is a general misunderstanding in regards to debt service impact on the Board of Education if this authority had been allowed. If the entire amount requested by the BOE was fully utilized, the $10 million, the debt service would amount to less than 0.5% of the board budget using typical financing conditions. I must and will respect the delegation's decision and appreciate the support from Senators Serafini and Edwards. I'm hopeful the delegation will reconsider during the next session when they have time to fully research what we were asking. What is most troubling for me was a statement made by Delegate Parrott in a Herald Mail article posted February 15, 2015. In the article, Mrs. Brightman pointed out to the delegation that the 7-member school board voted unanimously in December for the proposed measure. Delegate Parrott was then quoted as saying, "A few school board members have changed their minds since." I was completely unaware that any of our members had changed their minds regarding support for this bill. However, trusting the delegate's honesty, I have to assume that Delegate Parrott must have spoken to several members without my or any other member's knowledge. While any member has the right to change their mind for the sake of transparency, they have a responsibility to make this known to all fellow members. The unanimous vote was taken at the December 9, 2014 business meeting, and in every meeting since that time, there have been legislative updates allowing for members to speak to this bill or offer a motion to reconsider. Ample opportunities have been provided for members having a change of heart to publicly provide this courtesy to their fellow board members. Further, without public disclosure, it is irresponsible, in my opinion, and a violation of our operating norms for any member to covertly attempt to undermine the will of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Dr. Hardings.
Yes, I have several items today. First, I'd like to thank the Herald Mail for inviting me to be a judge at the county spelling bee last Saturday. It was a great event, some really brilliant kids. They can spell more names of foreign food than I can imagine. How they figure them out, I don't know. Spelling was never one of my best subjects, but it was great to see so many kids, public and private school kids, by the way, all competing together to try, as our students do on the athletic fields, competing academically to try to show just how sharp and good they can be in the classroom. So that was a great event, and I'm very grateful to the Herald Mail for asking me to be involved in it. Second, there was an article this weekend, I think it was on Sunday, maybe it was Saturday, in the Herald Mail as well, regarding a young man named Kobe Baker from Williamsport High School. He's a junior. He won the 182-pound weight class at the Class 2A, 1A regional wrestling tournament. What really caught my eye, and I'll just read these two paragraphs, Baker's victory came a year after he could only watch the regional tournament from the sidelines, unable to compete because he was academically ineligible. Quote, "Not being able to wrestle here last year kind of motivated me more," he said. I messed up last year, but I learned from my mistakes, and I went out and got what I should have had the opportunity to have last year. That just really struck me. We had a lot of discussion sometime the last year or two about our eligibility policy. And I don't know if this young man is eligible because the policy changed or whether he worked harder or not. But what comes through very clearly to me in those two paragraphs is that this young man learned something from his opportunity to be involved in high school athletics. He clearly learned that there was a consequence to his mistake. He clearly redoubled his efforts. He clearly worked hard, and then he was successful. To me, that's one of the reasons that high school athletics are so important. There's a young man who probably studied a lot harder because he wanted the opportunity to wrestle, and he was rewarded for his hard work. So behind that story, I'm sure there are many coaches, probably principals, teachers who worked hard with that young man to bring him back to the opportunity, so he could have the opportunity to be successful. And I think we should recognize all of those people and congratulate him for his success. I hope he will be an example to many, many other students in Washington County Public Schools who may struggle and who worry about whether they will have the opportunity to be successful. The final item I have is on the tech plan. I read the article and certainly understand why the decision was made not to pursue it as it was originally conceived and presented to the board this year. I certainly understand there is some division on the board about whether this is the right plan or the right process. I think I've made my position very clear. I continue to believe that our goal should be to put as many devices in the hands of as many kids as possible. This came home to me again just last week when my high school student had to graph some data for his science class, and he had a pencil and a piece of graph paper. For as much time as we hear that we try to teach students to think like scientists or to think like historians or to think like police officers, I've been a scientist for 25 years, and I don't think I've used a piece of graph paper in that entire 25-year period. If we're going to teach kids to be educated in a way that's relevant to the world in which they're going to work, I think this needs to be our goal. I understand that the board didn't support it, but I would hope that as a group of 7, we could agree on the goal. And if this plan wasn't the right plan, let's all work together to see what we can do to find a plan that will satisfy board members' concerns and move us forward as a school system to reach what I think is a critical goal for the future of our students, the employers who will eventually employ them, and the economic success of our county. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. I will finish up with just a housekeeping comment. Past practice has always been to coordinate school visits by Board of Ed members with the superintendent and the school principal. A board member arriving unannounced at a school can be disruptive to the regular schedule and to the instructional reason that the principal and the students are there to achieve. So I ask my colleagues to be sensitive to that and to please coordinate with the superintendent and principal first. So with that, we have come to the end of the agenda, and I adjourn the meeting.
I had one more comment that I would like to read, please, in response to the article in the paper.
You had an opportunity. We're coming back around.
I would like that opportunity.
All right.
Thank you. In the article in the Herald Mail this morning, Mrs. Brightman said that there was some confusion about the funding of the plan. And my question is what exactly the plan is that we're confused about. Dr. Wilcox said the iLearn document we have on paper is a concept only. The document we have reflects the instructional component, but not the funding and the implementation components. I would like to see a document outlining the proposed deployment timeline that includes 1, the number of years to reach 100% implementation, 2, what happens each year and the funding required for each year, especially beyond year 2. 3, the funding required for maintaining the project once we reach 100% rollout. 4, where the funding comes from each year, including what budget line items are to be reduced, if any, to help pay for the initiative. 5, the personnel cost. The iLearn document lists several possible positions. 6, the explanation of the professional development process. Mrs. Brightman says the money is already there for years 1 and 2. However, I'd like to be sure that there is a funding plan to pay for the entire project, including money to support the successful use of the technology once it gets into the hands of our students, and to maintain the hardware once we have it. I'm not interested in starting a project with only a vision of where we're going for the first half. Beginning to implement this plan without a complete understanding of how we reach 100% implementation and how to maintain it into the future would be like building a new school without classrooms or a cafeteria and leaving it to future boards to figure out how to pay for them.
Thank you. We are now at the end of our agenda, and we're not going to use this as a rebuttal. This is board member comment. I know that.
Disappointed that should not have happened.
And I apologize. I try to be courteous to all of my colleagues when they ask to be recognized, even if it's out of order. So with that, we're at the end of this agenda, and we are adjourned.
Mrs. Brightman, in the future, could you start at that end, please?